We're excited to have Nancy Hainsworth here today from Nancy's Creation and Seed. Nancy is an entrepreneur of her own website and inspires the ideas of fresh homegrown food, plants, and a cleaner. So my first question is, Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in gardening? What started the idea of having your career and why?
When I was little, I had a neighbor who had this massive backyard garden, and I spent hours watching him garden. I always wanted to have a garden like that. I asked my parents for one, and my parents gave me this little bitty postage stamp. Then as I got older, I never did get the house so I could have that big yard to do that. So I ended up learning how to do gardening from an urban setting. So growing out of pots on decks and balconies, and when in a rental or in a condo, trying to grow fruits and vegetables in incredibly strange locations and really small spaces. It was very hard to learn how to do that because at the time, basically everything you got was from a nursery. And the nurseries, as much as they're lovely places to buy plants and seeds and everything else, they never have to grow in small spaces. So they can give you some basic advice, but it's limited because many of them have never done it. So that's how my business got started.
How did you learn more about gardening? Was it from people or the internet or?
I'm old, so it wasn't the internet. I learned mostly from trying. I killed a lot of plants. That's how I learned. I just tried different pots, different strategies, and over time I got better at it, as always happens with anything, right? The more you try anything. As I got older, I ended up joining some Facebook groups and stuff that were other gardeners and learned some tricks of the trade that I had never learned before, and took some gardening workshops because, of course, I've never officially learned gardening. I just did it and learned from my mistakes.
So when did you decide that you wanted to start your own website, and what were some obstacles and challenges you faced?
One of the obstacles I faced is that technology changes a lot faster than it used to. And the last time I did a website, I'm not sure you were born. So you can imagine how much change has happened since then. But yes, that was probably the biggest hurdle, trying to get the website going, and trying to figure out how to sell living things online, because you can't mail them, you can't ship them. I mean, I can ship seeds, but I can't ship plants, right? So it was a matter of trying to figure out the best method to try and let people know that my products were there, but yet how you would get them to people. COVID was actually really good for that, though, because you got to see what other people were doing. But yes, I did my website mostly because of COVID.
So when did your website start? When did you develop it?
In the fall. So it's been less than a year since my website started.
What advice would you give to people looking towards a career similar to yours, and what you wish you had known when you started your website?
Probably it hasn't been quite in existence, I think, long enough for me to have some real input onto that one yet, because I think it's still in the creation stage in a lot of ways. As with anything, when you first start something, it goes through some changes as it builds, right? So I think we're still in that stage.
And what would you say a day in your work life looks like?
Oh, my work life is very strange because it kind of merges with my daily life, because I have a 9-year-old kid. Because it's my backyard garden that is my source of all my seeds and my plants. It's kind of like you water the plants, then go do dishes, and then you go and you know what I mean, because it's all in the same place. So it's a very strange working environment.
How do you believe that youth can be impacted by being outdoors?
Oh, there's so many ways. When we were younger, of course, we didn't have the internet. I know, I'm old. So, we always were outside. That was the normal thing, right? There was so much exercise. You got fresh air. The vitamin D was never a question because you were always outside. For youth, that's pretty critical. There's a lot of health value in that. And learning about the planet. I mean, you don't learn about the planet from books. I mean, you can learn some things, but it's not the same. I mean, my little girl goes out to my backyard to hang out with the frogs. Oh, speaking of frogs, there's one right there. But we have I counted the other day, about 15 frogs in our pond. My kid gets to see that. And because we have a pond in our backyard, there's other wildlife that comes. There's the dragonflies and the chipmunks. And my kid, although she doesn't realize it, she just starts to know how nature works and how the ecosystem works. She can't probably put it in words, but she knows it. And that's valuable, especially in a world where we're worrying about climate change and all kinds of things.
When you were younger, you wanted to have a big garden. So what do you think lots of youth can do now to become closer to the environment?
Anything that you do helps you get closer to the environment, depending on what your circumstances are. That's why I have the business I have, because many people don't have the big backyard. So there are plants you can actually grow indoors, even to eat. There are plants that you can grow on your deck or your balcony that will help you to be able to have fresh vegetables and to be closer to nature right there on your balcony. I think that the best thing young people can do is to be in nature as much as you're able, depending on the circumstances. I mean, obviously, if you're in the downtown core of a city, you're not going to be able to be in the bush. You can still have your garden, or you can still have your plants in the house or in your bedroom or wherever, right? That little bit teaches you.
And how do you think your job educates people of all ages about the environment?
My job is still building, so that's a good question. Right now, I'm supporting Waterloo Region School Food Gardens, as you know. I've donated plants and seeds and to various different schools, and I've done some workshops that are on the Waterloo Region School Food Gardens website. I'm working on doing some more as it goes. That's still new for me. So there's that. And of course, I teach my kid who teaches other kids.
On your website, you said that the Indigenous elders help to cultivate your love for the environment through their teaching. So can you tell us more about that and how that?
When I was younger, I lived overseas, and I discovered I really didn't know enough about our Indigenous people here, and that's something I needed to remedy. So when I came home, I actually participated I started learning on my own, just doing some projects in school on Indigenous people. But the learning about the environment came along with that, because our Indigenous people, that's one of them critical pieces in their culture, in every one of the cultures, in different ways. Of course, I don't know all the cultures, obviously. That's a lot of learning, but I've learned about some of the cultures that would have lived in this part of the country. And I met many elders going through youth and elders conferences and so on. I learned things like certain plants that can work together to be in harmony with each other. And the closer you build your garden to the way nature is, the more self-sufficient your garden is, if that makes sense. And that's something I learned from them. If I don't know the answer to how my garden should be treated, I look at the trees in the forest and I watch, do they clean up the leaves, for example, right? In the autumn, the forest obviously doesn't clean up the trees. So I leave my leaves in my garden too. Those are the kinds of things that I've learned from the First Nations populations, because our culture said you should clean it up in the autumn, right? The knowledge has changed now, but at the time that was what everybody was doing. So
okay, so this is going to be the last question. I'm just wondering, what do you think stops a lot of youth from being outdoors and doing things like gardening?
I'm not sure what stops them, but I do know that sometimes there's so many different stimulating activities that youth have that didn't exist in the past. Things like video games and TV and stuff like that. Those are very quick and easy things that are instantly rewarding. Gardening takes a little longer for it to be rewarding, or being out in nature takes a little longer for the reward to come. For somebody who's used to having instant gratification, it takes a little longer to see the appreciation, right? So I think a lot of it is just the fact that our youth are not used to waiting to see the glory of things that come from waiting for something, if that makes any sense.